Political discussion ticking over in the background to the current early bushfire season has been the extent to which the early fire season might or might not be connected to our changing climate. The Prime Minister has added to the discussion this morning, and another who might is our Wednesday regular on Breaking Politics, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, in his Kooyong office in Melbourne. Nice to have you back in on Breaking Politics, Josh.
Nice to be with you, Tim.
The UN's climate chief says there is absolutely a link between the New South Wales bushfires and climate change. Prime Minister Tony Abbott now says she is talking out of a hat. This is ordinary Australian climate that we've seen over centuries in this country. What do you say in terms of who's right and who's wrong?
Well, Tony Abbott's absolutely right. We have seen, a vast changes in terms of the climate over a century. And we have seen very hot days in New South Wales in October, decades ago. I thought it was outrageous that Adam Bandt tried to use the tragedies of the New South Wales bushfires to push a partisan political point. And he was slapped down pretty hard for that, and rightly so. This is not a time to use what is, obviously a very distressing period for a lot of people to make check partisan political points.
But given the weight of scientific evidence on the question of a changing and warming climate around the world, and certainly in this country, isn't it a little bit risky for us to say the bushfires have nothing to do with that climate change?
Well, what do you say then, Tim, to the fact that there were bushfires decades, centuries ago, during this time of the year? I mean, the climate does change, and there's a variety of reasons for that. I, do believe in global warming, and the coalition has said, that it's united in its commitment to reduce carbon emissions by 5% on the 2000 levels by 2020. We have our direct action plan to do that. But, to go beyond that brief and what Adam Bandt did and make partisan attacks based on what is tragedy in New South Wales, I think was very unfortunate. And effectively, he was blaming, what was wrong with his comments is he was blaming Tony Abbott for the bushfires. And Tony Abbott's policies. How ridiculous is that, Tim?
OK, but it's not the only political issue to attach to the bushfires. Just yesterday, Senator John Williams said the bushfires were a powerful example of why we need grazing in national parks, a hugely contentious issue in some sections of our community. How's that not politicising the bushfires?
I don't think John Williams, otherwise known as Wacker Williams, I don't think he was making the point that, somebody is one of his political opponents is responsible for the bushfires. That's what, Adam Bandt was saying. Tony Abbott was responsible for the bushfires, and that was outrageous. In terms of taking precautionary measures to reduce the impact that fires in our high country may have on loss of life and loss of livestock, that's an absolutely valid point for someone like John Williams to make.
The Prime Minister has also cast a little light on one of the most celebrated of the MP's expenses case, that is Don Randall flying business class with his wife from Perth to Cairns return at the time that he apparently bought an investment property in Cairns.
The gentleman in question tells me that he didn't do that he went from Perth to Cairns to have some very important discussions with the whip.
Does that close the book on this case or not?
Well, look, I think Don Randall has said that he had reason to be there, and he's also dealt with this issue publicly. I just think, Tim, there are many instances on the Labor side where there's been a misuse of the entitlements. We've heard Julia Gillard had to pay money back. Tony Burke had to pay money back. A number of them have had to pay money back. Even Mark Dreyfus, ended up with egg on his face after accusing the coalition of misuse of entitlements to find that he'd been on a private ski trip to Perisher. The rules here are a little opaque, and I think that this is an issue where members of Parliament should proceed, on the side of caution.
Agreed, this is not a party political issue, and it's certainly blame can't attach to one side of politics or another. But if Don Randall was travelling to meet the party whip, doesn't that make the point that he was on party business, not representing his electorate? So the taxpayer is entitled to say, hang on, you were spending thousands on not doing the work we expect you to do with taxpayers' money.
Look, as I said, the rules are quite general, and you've seen politicians from both sides have to pay money back when they've realised that there has been an incident where probably you could question those claims. But I don't think in Don Randall's case we're going to get any further on this, Tim, because he's had a bit to say already on it.
You're a follower of foreign policy. Did Senator Bob Carr do a good job as Foreign Affairs Minister?
He had a woeful record, Tim. Bob Carr, I thought, was a natural heir to Kevin Rudd as Foreign Minister, preferring to fly and to meet and to greet rather than to actually do things on the ground that advances Australia's interests. I mean, Bob Carr famously was writing his own memoirs while he was still in the job. He was writing his own memoirs about being Foreign Minister while he was still in the job. I can't remember what Bob Carr has had to say of any significance on the big challenges facing Australia, namely, the tensions in the South China Sea and the East China Sea and the rise of Islamic extremism in our region and the important trade agenda. I mean, on Bob Carr's watch, you had all those free trade agreements that sort of sat in the labour in tray. Has he talked about the role of the US in our region at length? Has he explained to the Australian people that we don't have to choose between, the United States and China? I mean, a good indication of Bob Carr's original thinking on foreign policy was his blog that, quietly disappeared once he got parachuted into the Senate. And that had a whole range of wacky ideas on it, Tim. He was talking about, Iran and their nuclear program. And, I got the sense that he was giving a green light to that. Barack Obama's speech to the Australian Parliament, he described, I think, as strange. He wasn't a great fan of the British and others bringing sort of an end to Gaddafi's rule in Libya. I mean, he had some really wacky ideas, Bob Carr, before he went into Parliament. I think, this was his dream job because he was a great historian of American politics. But when you actually look at his record, it's very, very poor, and I think he'll be quickly forgotten.
To close, Josh Frydenberg, what do you say to same-sex couples who are today applauding the ACT as the first jurisdiction in this country to allow them to marry?
Look, Tim, what George Brandis and the government is saying is that we need some consistency in Australia's laws here, and it looks like the ACT legislation is inconsistent with federal laws. This will obviously be tested in the High Court, and George Brandis has asked for the court to expedite this process. So I think we'll have an answer pretty clear, a clear answer pretty soon. But the point is, Australia does need to have a consistent position on this issue, and it looks like the ACT is out of sync with the federal legislation.
Consistent position, but consistently no to same-sex couples who want to marry?
Well, there's no change in the government's position on this issue. I mean, Tony Abbott has said that it will be up to the party room to decide if there's going to be a conscience vote on any new legislation that would go to the Parliament. I think it's a very fair position that he's taken. But I cannot see in the near term the federal legislation changing.
So you don't see this issue surfacing in the joint party room anytime soon?
I didn't say that. I mean, indeed it may, and there are definitely colleagues of mine with different sets of views on this issue. But in terms of the federal government's position, I mean, Tony Abbott has made it clear that his position hasn't changed.
Josh Frydenberg, always good to have you on Breaking Politics.
Nice to be with you, Tim.